Joining me now is Harvard Law professor Larry Lessig, and we've talked to him a lot about electoral integrity in the past on several different issues. This time it's about ranked choice voting. Welcome back, Larry.
Great to be here, Cenk.
All right, so tell us about what we can do in the presidential primaries that might make a difference in our democracy.
Well, we have a primary. I think there's now about 140 candidates running for the Democratic primary. And one way we can make that system more rational is if we adopt what's called ranked choice voting. So what ranked choice voting would do is give people the chance to rank their first choice, their second choice, their third choice. And then when the votes are tallied, if your first choice turns out not to get 15% of the vote or more, then your first choice is dropped and your second choice vote is then counted. And so we're in the process of trying to get New Hampshire to adopt this ranked choice voting method so that after the New Hampshire primary, we'll have both the ranking of who won first, second, third under the first choice method, but also we'd have a good way to measure who actually gets the support of a majority of New Hampshire voters by using the ranked choice method in addition. So next week, this bill will be introduced in the Senate, and we hope we can move it through the legislature in time for 2020.
What's the idea here in terms of what we're trying to protect? What is the problem at hand that we're solving for?
Well, if you've got a system that's just worried about who gets first past the post or who gets the most votes, the people at the top don't really have to worry about what anybody else in the election cares about. Because if you're, Joe Biden, assuming he makes it through this series of troubling questions, or whoever it is, all you're worried about is getting the most votes, so you get the most delegates. But with ranked choice, you're interested in not only getting the most votes, but also getting the votes of the people who don't do quite as well as you. So somebody like Andrew Yang, who's obviously pushing universal basic income as a primary issue that he cares most about, he would be ignored typically in an ordinary primary system. But in this system, people are interested in making sure that maybe if Andrew Yang doesn't become the number one vote getter, then his number two choices might go for somebody else, and that person might be able to persuade them by taking Andrew Yang seriously. So what it does is, interestingly, it both includes more views become relevant, but it helps us find candidates who are actually standing for a significant chunk of the Democratic base. That helps us figure out candidates who would be supported most strongly by the Democratic Party. And finally, what it does is create a real incentive for people not to diss other Democratic candidates in a way that makes it really turns them off so that they're not willing to support them in their number two or number three ranking. So we think it could really improve the opportunity of this primary to get down to some serious candidates relatively quickly, while considering the views of other candidates and including them where they might persuade voters.
So let's talk about another scenario here. Let's stay with the people that you mentioned. Somebody wants to vote for Andrew Yang in New Hampshire, but they're worried that Joe Biden's going to get more votes than Bernie Sanders, and they don't want Biden to win. Sanders is their second choice, but Yang would be their first choice. So then they're very likely not going to vote for Andrew Yang, even though they liked him the best, because they're worried about electability. And so then all the people that are below the threshold, they have a double disadvantage in a sense. Is that right?
Under the existing system, that's exactly right. But under ranked choice, they have a reason to vote for Andrew Yang because they might believe Andrew Yang is pushing really important ideas, which I think he is. Not only is he talking about UBI, he's also talking about fundamental reform in the way we fund campaigns. He's one of the first candidates to come out openly to support vouchers as a way to fund congressional campaigns. And he supports ranked choice voting as well. So Andrew Yang, you might be your first choice, but if he doesn't make it past the 15% threshold, then your vote pivots over to your second choice. So it could be Bernie Sanders as your second choice. It could be another person who doesn't make it. And if that's true, then it goes to your third choice. And so the point is you continue to move your vote until it gets to a person who has at least 15% or more. And so your vote is never wasted, but you have a chance to express your support for someone without worrying about whether the vote is going to be wasted.
And this is very, very practical because at this point, probably the top concern Elizabeth Warren has is the perception of electability that the voters have. They like her policies a lot. They're just worried about whether they'd be quote unquote throwing their votes away if they vote for her instead of some of the people that are leading. I know it's so early, but yet people are still considering these kind of calculations. And that's deeply unfair to someone who has great policies, but has this specter of so-called electability hanging over their head.
It's so crazy to be talking about electability in April of 2015. Remember, April 2015 is when Bernie Sanders entered the race in the last time we had a presidential election or Democratic primary. So I think what we should be talking about right now are ideas that would make people excited to vote Democratic. And get as many candidates to talk about real ideas, and let's bracket the electability question. And I want to help encourage that by giving us a way to count votes that doesn't punish you for voting for someone who doesn't seem like the most certain person to win. We'll get to the place where we can be worrying about who's going to win the primary and who's going to beat Donald Trump in the general election. Those are two really important questions. But the Democratic Party has got to attract ideas that excite people to vote Democratic. And rather than like the last time, picking the king, or in that case, the queen, 24 months ahead of the election and stifling excitement because of that choice, at this moment, they ought to be encouraging and including as many people as they can so that we find the ideas that really excite people. Mayor Pete has surprised a lot of people and with the appeal that he has. And I think that's exactly what this stage of the primary should be, a stage where people can talk about ideas and see which ideas really excite people. And let's set up a system for counting votes that encourages that diversity rather than shuts it down at the very first step.
So, Larry, the principal concern that people have about ranked choice voting is about paper ballots, that it makes paper ballots difficult, if not impossible, and makes the verification of the voting process much more difficult. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so this is the way we've set it up. We're talking about it working in New Hampshire is this: basically, every ballot is effectively a paper ballot in New Hampshire. Some of them are counted through an optical scanner, and some of them in the traditional system are just counted as paper ballots. But under the system we're talking about, every ballot would look the same. They would all be ranked choice ballots. People just fill in their bubbles. Here's my first choice, my second choice, my third choice. And then on the election night, those ballots would be counted in the old-fashioned way. So we'd know on election night who won the most votes in New Hampshire. But then they'd be gathered and run through a tabulating machine that can then calculate the ranked choices so that our hope is by the morning we'd be able to come out and say, here's the ranked choices for votes in New Hampshire. So paper ballots help that just as easily as anything. We don't have to build new technology. And my real hope is if we can demonstrate that we can do it in New Hampshire, we could do the same thing in California, because the only county or the only area that suffers a technology problem in California is Los Angeles. But if we did the same system we adopted in New Hampshire, then we could imagine figuring a ranked choice out of California as well.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.